HMS Queen Mary was part of the estimates of 1910, being laid down just 10 months after HMS Lion and HMS Princess Royal. In most respects, she was an improved version of those splendid cats, having a powerful armament of 8 13.5-inch guns and a top speed of 27.5 knots. On paper and in practice, she was a powerful ship, entering service in September of 1913, a year before the start of the Great War. In her service, she would be part of the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron. Because of that, she participated in some of the more famous engagements, like the First Battle of Heligoland Bight, yet missing Dogger Bank, and of course Jutland. She's most well known for her cataclysmic destruction in the Battle of Jutland, in part due to the unsafe way ammunition was handled on her. As I mentioned in the introduction, Queen Mary could be thought of as an improved version of the splendid Cats, Lion, and Princess Royal, with the differences amounting to 1. Beam and displacement increases of 6 inches and 650 tons respectively, 2. Arrangements of 4-inch guns slightly modified, with light protection for these, 3. Horizontal armoring slightly increased, with variations in distribution, 4. Accommodation of officers forward and men aft reversed. This coming from R.A. Burt's British Battleships of World War I. She was laid down on March 11, 1911, launched on the 20th of March 1912, and was ready for service by August of 1913. As completed, she had a normal displacement of 26,780 tons. Her machinery consisted of 42 Yarrow large tube boilers, providing steam for 2 Parson direct drive turbines, powering 4 shafts, giving her a design shaft horsepower of 75,000 and a design top speed of 27.5 knots. In actuality, she topped off at 83,450 shaft horsepower and 28.47 knots on her steam trials in June of 1913. As for armament, she carried 8 13.5-inch 45 caliber guns and twin turrets, 2 forward, 1 amidships, and 1 aft, 16 4-inch 50 caliber guns distributed throughout the ship, 1 12-pounder, 4 3-pounder guns, 5 machine guns, and 2 torpedo tubes rounded out her armament. As for her armor, it was a similar thickness as to Lion. The main belt had a thickness of 9 inches amidships, with the armor getting thinner going forward or aft, going down to between 4 inches and 5 inches. Bulkheads of a maximum thickness of 4 inches, barbettes of a maximum thickness of 9 inches, a conning tower with a maximum thickness of 10 inches. The main battery turrets would have 9 inches of armor on the face and 8 on the sides, and the roof and rear armor varied between 3.25 inches and 2.5 inches. The main deck had a maximum thickness of 2 inches. On the 4th of September 1913, she entered service as part of the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron of the Home Fleet, where she participated in the various activities the fleet conducted, namely gunnery practice. Before the Great War and during, an emphasis was put on gunnery speed, with a faster rate of fire being preferred over careful calculation. This obsession with speed led to unsafe practices like stacking ammunition outside protective magazines and leaving anti-flash doors open during drills or battles. Queen Mary's crew excelled at this speed school, being some of the fastest gunners in the Royal Navy. At the end of May 1914, Queen Mary sailed in company with the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron, consisting of Lion, Princess Royal, and New Zealand, to St. Petersburg as a display of British naval power. David Beatty and his wife, Ethel, acted as hosts to the Emperor and Empress of Russia. Mooring in Kronstadt for 10 days in early June of 1914, Queen Mary would be part of the festivities. One night, Beatty hosted a ball on Lion and invited 2,000 Russian guests. In company with the British Embassy, the Navy secured 1,200 champagne bottles from around the city's cellars. The guests overwhelmed the deck of Lion, and New Zealand had to be brought alongside to accommodate the guests, with it being quite the party. This successful trip with Queen Mary in tow led to the knighting of Beatty on August 2nd. In addition to this, he was promoted to acting vice admiral, as war appeared to be imminent. Previously on the 1st, Queen Mary joined the redesignated Grand Fleet and was stationed out of Scapa Flow, as the natural anchorage provided several advantages. Being larger than the anchorages at Rosyth or Cromarty Firth, it is situated on the Pentland Firth, the shortest and safest route by which ships on the west coast of Britain could move into the North Sea. With its frequent bad weather, the entrances were expected to be almost invulnerable to hostile warships, not to mention it being closer to the gap to be patrolled between Scotland and Norway. However, there were disadvantages, with all the supplies having to be brought by ship and by the time war kicked off, the anchorage was not prepared with defenses and or all the necessities such a large fleet needed. Coupled with the possibility of battle and the lack of readiness at Scapa Flow, Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Fleet, Admiral John Jellicoe, had the fleet at sea almost constantly, including Queen Mary, as that way the ships could be ready. However, during this time in August, the capital ships of the High Seas Fleet were stowed away safely deep inside the Heligoland Bight. The constant demands of First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, for offensive measures, and two zealous commodores stationed in Harwich, Reginald Tyrwhitt, the commander of the Harwich destroyer flotillas, and Roger Keyes, who commanded the long-range submarines, provided the answer to the First Lord's demands. Keyes, whose submarines had been patrolling the Bight, found that every evening German light cruisers escorted destroyers to a point 20 miles northwest of Heligoland, where the destroyers fanned out to patrol against submarines and mine layers. Using that information, Tyrwhitt came up with a plan where, as the German destroyers returned to their dawn rendezvous, a superior force of British cruisers and destroyers coming down in darkness from the north would sweep in behind them from east to west across the Bight and catch them in a trap. The plan involved 31 destroyers of Tyrwhitt's 2 flotillas and 9 of Keyes' long-range submarines. Keyes and Tyrwhitt hoped for massive support, suggesting the Grand Fleet be waiting in case the High Seas Fleet was put to sea. In place of this support, 2 battlecruisers, New Zealand and Invincible, were to be stationed 40 miles to the northwest of Heligoland, and the old Bacchante-class cruisers 100 miles to the west. On the 26th of August, 2 days after the Admiralty meeting where the planned attack of the Harwich force was decided, did anyone decide to inform the Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Fleet? Jellicoe asking, proposed to cooperate on sweep on Friday, moving Grand Fleet cruisers and destroyers to suitable positions with Battle Fleet near. Request I may be given full details of proposed operations by land wire tonight. I am leaving at 6 a.m. tomorrow. After sending another urgent message at 6 p.m., Jellicoe was told cooperation with the Battle Fleet was not required, but the battlecruisers could support the operation if it were convenient. Thus, Lion, Queen Mary, and Princess Royal sailed at 5 a.m. on the 27th to join New Zealand and Invincible. Beatty's battlecruisers were escorted by Commodore Goodenough's 6 modern light cruisers. Following this, Jellicoe put to sea with 4 battle squadrons of the Grand Fleet, informing the Admiralty what he had done once his ships were out at sea. Beatty knew about as much as Jellicoe did when leaving Scapa Flow, signaling his battlecruisers at 8 a.m. We are to rendezvous with Invincible in New Zealand at 5 a.m. August 28th to support destroyers and submarines. Operations consisting of a sweep. Heligoland to westward, know very little, shall hope to learn more as we go along. To support the operation, Beatty planned to have Goodenough's light cruisers follow Tyrwhitt's destroyers 10 miles astern, and the battlecruisers remain 30 miles to the northwest. Tyrwhitt and Keyes were not informed of this, as they were already at sea by the time the Admiralty sent the message to Harwich. A wireless signal was not sent because the message was mistakenly placed on a desk to await their return. By 11:35 on the morning of the 28th, the Battle of Heligoland Bight had been going on for some time, with Tyrwhitt's forces being entangled with a fight with German forces in the Bight. Beatty had sent Commodore Goodenough's light cruisers ahead to assist with the fighting in the inner Bight. Soon the light forces could be facing more German cruisers, at least 4 and possibly as many as 6, including perhaps 1 large armored cruiser, and with the afternoon came the possibility of heavy German units coming out from Wilhelmshaven. Beatty, after debating with his flag captain, Arnold Chatfield, aboard HMS Lion, he made up his mind and decided to support Tyrwhitt, counting on the high speed of his ships and the surprise that they would cause. Beatty swung Lion, Queen Mary, Princess Royal, Invincible, and New Zealand around to the southeast, and steamed in line at 26 knots and soon 27 knots. As the British battlecruisers approached the battlefield, Commodore Tyrwhitt was not in a great position, being shelled by multiple German cruisers and wondering if his forces would soon be overwhelmed. Yet out of the mist, one by one came the battlecruisers, and taking from Castles of Steel, Britain, Germany, and the winning of the Great War at Sea by Robert K. Massey, a young lieutenant serving on one of Tyrwhitt's crippled destroyers, described the same moment. There, straight ahead of us in lovely procession, like elephants walking through a pack of dogs, came Lion, Queen Mary, Princess Royal, Invincible, and New Zealand. Great and grim and uncouth as some antediluvian monsters. How solid they looked, how utterly earthquaking. We pointed out our latest aggressor to them, and we went west while they went east, and just a little later, We heard the thunder of their guns. At 12:37, as Lion approached Arethusa, Tyrwhitt's flagship, they were under attack by the German cruisers Strasbourg and Köln. Strasbourg was able to flee, however Köln wasn't able to. Beatty steered to overtake the German cruiser, and as they did so, Chatfield described it best. In a few moments, the German was hit many times by heavy shells. She bravely returned our fire with her own little 4-inch guns, aiming at our conning tower. One felt the tiny 4-inch shells splatter against the conning tower armor and the pieces sizz over it. In a few minutes, the Köln was a hulk. Aware that he was within enemy home waters, Beatty chose to keep his forces concentrated, as the German dreadnoughts could appear at any moment. The battlecruisers zigzagged, and off their port side they spotted the old German light cruiser Ariadne, and at a range of 6,000 yards, the poor cruiser stood no chance. Soon after this, at 1:10 p.m., Beatty with his battlecruisers retired from the battlefield and withdrew to the northwest, and made a general signal to the forces in the Bight to do the same. The battlecruisers steered home, and on the 30th, they returned to Scapa Flow to be greeted by the cheers of the Grand Fleet. Following the raids on Great Yarmouth, and specifically Scarborough, Hartlepool, and Whitby, in mid-December of 1914, Beatty was given permission to make his permanent base at Rosyth in the Firth of Forth, as to be closer in case of a German attack, which would come in late January of 1915 with the Battle of Dogger Bank. However, Queen Mary was not present, as she was undergoing a refit at Portsmouth. An interesting prelude to the Battle of Jutland occurred when HMS Lion was hit, causing a fire in her A-turret lobby, where it could have spread down to her magazines. But because there was little ammunition present in the turret lobby, the fire was extinguished. It would not be until after Jutland that the intrinsic danger of fire transmission was recognized, following the devastating losses of 3 battlecruisers. In April, she undertook a different but still important mission. She patrolled off the coast of New York City to send a message to the German liners interred in the harbor since the outbreak of the war. If the liners violated their internment and tried to break out, a British battlecruiser was waiting to gobble them up. A year passed, and it was not until the afternoon of May 31st when the British battlecruisers would see battle again. Earlier in the day, the High Seas Fleet under Admiral Reinhard Scheer sailed from Wilhelmshaven, with Admiral Franz von Hipper's battlecruisers weighing anchor at around 3 in the morning. By the early afternoon of the 31st, the 2 main arms of the British forces, Jellicoe's Grand Fleet and Beatty's battlecruisers, were out in force, with Beatty in command of the 1st and 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron, along with Evan Thomas's Queen Elizabeth-class ships of the 5th Battle Squadron. Upon seeing the British ships at 3:30 p.m., Hipper understood that Beatty intended to cut him off from his home base, and made a turn of 180 degrees to the south. Intending to close the gap, Beatty increased speed, leaving the 4 Queen Elizabeth-class ships behind. By 3:40, the battlecruisers had formed a single line steaming south, with Lion leading, followed by Princess Royal, Queen Mary, Tiger, New Zealand, and Indefatigable. However, the Germans opened up the battle when, at 3:48, while smoking a cigar, Hipper gave the order to open fire. Fire distribution was a problem on the British side, as Beatty intended the first 2 ships in his line to engage the leading ship in the German line. This was done correctly, with Lion and Princess Royal targeting Lützow, whereas Queen Mary fired on Seydlitz instead of Der Flinger, as she should have. Tiger in New Zealand fired on Moltke, leaving Der Flinger unmolested for a full 10 minutes. Queen Mary opened up at around 3:50 at a range of 17,500 yards, and at 3:55, Seydlitz received her first hit from Queen Mary, and taking from German battlecruisers of World War I, their design, construction, and operations by Gary Staff, Seydlitz received her first hit in compartment 13 to starboard forward. The electrical switch room fell out. 2 minutes later, C turret barbette was struck, and the working chamber was penetrated, and a powder fire started, just as with turret D at Dogger Bank. However, the new precautions prevented the spread of the catastrophic powder fire. Even with the loss of Indefatigable at 4:02, things for Queen Mary were going beautifully. Being the crack gunnery ship, she continued to hit her mark. At 4:17, she hit Seydlitz again, putting a 5.9-inch casemate out of action. Instead of continuing to stay trained on Seydlitz, she shifted her fire to Der Flinger. While Der Flinger and Seydlitz concentrated their fire on her, being hit first by Der Flinger at 4:21, knocking out the right gun of Q turret. At 4:25 and 4:26, Queen Mary was hit again by salvos in the magazine of one of her forward turrets, where the cordite detonated. Let's let Officer Ernest Francis, one of the survivors, tell us what happened in Nick Jellicoe's Jutland: The Unfinished Battle. Then came the big explosion, which shook us a bit, and on looking at the pressure gauge, I saw the pressure had failed. Immediately after that came what I call the big smash, and I was dangling in the air on a bowl, in which it saved me from being thrown off the floor of the turret. Francis would recover from this and witness the 4-inch battery closest to him completely smashed, and the ship listing badly. Der Flinger increased her fire, and the awful death of Queen Mary was captured by an officer from Tiger's Bridge. I saw one salvo straddle her, 3 shells out of 4 hit. The next salvo straddled her, and 2 more shells hit her. As they hit, I saw a dull red glow amidships, and then the ship seemed to open up like a puffball, or one of those toadstool things when one squeezes it. Then there was another dull red glow, somewhere forward, and the whole ship seemed to collapse inwards. The funnel and mast fell into the middle of the ship, and the hull was blown outwards. The roof of the turrets were blown 100 feet high, then everything was smoke, and a bit of the stern was the only part of the ship above the water. The Tiger put helm hard a starboard, and we just cleared the remains of Queen Mary's stern by a few feet. The explosion of Queen Mary reached 1,000 feet above her, and the hull split in two, and as she sank, her propellers were still turning. Out of the 1,258 men on board, only a handful survived. All officers except 4 midshipmen died, including the Japanese observer and naval attaché in London, Commander Chisuke Shimomura. The ships around her, including both the battlecruisers and escorting destroyers, could not stop as the battle continued, as she slipped beneath the waves. Following this is when David Beatty made his now famous comment. Turning to his flag captain, Arnold Chatfield, he said, "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today." Indeed there was. As Georg von Hasse, Der Flinger's gunnery control officer, said, "The Queen Mary is firing less rapidly than we were, but usually full salvos. I could see the shells coming, and I had to admit they were shooting superbly. As a rule, all 8 shells fell together, but they were almost always over or short. But the poor Queen Mary was having a bad time. In addition to Der Flinger, she was being engaged by Seydlitz. At 4:26 p.m., she met her doom. First, a vivid red flame shot up from her forepart. Then came an explosion forward, followed by a much heavier explosion amidships. Black debris flew into the air, and immediately afterwards, the whole ship blew up with a terrific explosion. A gigantic cloud of smoke rose. The mast collapsed inwards, and the smoke cloud hit everything and rose higher and higher. Finally, nothing but a thick, black cloud of smoke remained where the ship had been. At its base, the smoke column covered only a small area, but it widened towards the summit and looked a monstrous pine tree. Due to the obsession with speed and gunnery, dangerous practices like stacking ammunition outside protective magazines and leaving the anti-flash doors open during battle helped lead to the destruction of Queen Mary. Upon further inspection of the wrecks of Queen Mary, Invincible, and Indefatigable, revealed silk cordite bags had been brought up from the magazines and stacked in the passageways below the guns. The cordite itself was unstable and became even more so with age, so it could catch fire easily. This unsafe handling was common throughout the Battlecruiser Squadron. Some, like Lion's chief gunnery officer A.C. Grant, realized that the battlecruisers had a lackadaisical nature in handling the dangerous powder. Where on Beatty's flagship, he limited the amount that could be stacked in the passageways with considerable opposition. Following the battle, committees were set up to investigate what had happened to the ships, and it was determined the ships were sunk by heavy shells. But with the stacking of cordite, each turret became its own magazine, and it was clear that the practice should not continue as it was putting the ships at a great risk if they were hit. Now, there's a lot more detail to dig into with this subject, and I recommend you do your own research. I will put some books and free websites down in the description. HMS Queen Mary, although remembered for her loss, should also be remembered for her career, as it was a fairly impressive one. She had a crack crew of gunners, at least by the standards of the Royal Navy at the time, and with her design, she certainly was a powerful ship. It's just the method by which the crew achieved their skill in reloading put the ship at an even greater risk when being fired at, causing her unfortunate fate. But I hope you enjoyed this look at Queen Mary, and if you would, please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great day.